As far as the notion of, whether this is motivated by church or the activism inspires one to go to church, I see that more as an ongoing cycle between contemplation and action, that the action produces material that's good subject for contemplation, and I think the contemplation can renew you for going back to action. And it's ongoing. It's not a one-time transformation. I think my motivation at its core is religious and spiritual, but it's more complicated than that, and it's more interactive, cyclical than that. I grew up in Nashville, going to Westminster Presbyterian Church, which is one of the big steeple churches on West End. Very traditional and mainstream. I don't think you could, at that point, clearly characterize it as right or left. I think it was fairly centrist. I think it's become more conservative lately, and I think it may have a unique distinction of having among its members both senators of the state simultaneously. When Lamar Alexander and Bill Frist were Tennessee senators, they were both members of Westminster. So I think that says a lot about its prominence, and I'm not sure how much it really says about its political persuasion. But that's where I grew up, and it was a very good introduction to Christianity and Jesus' ministry, and it was a wonderful, nurturing community. When I went to college, I attended the Congregational Church in the college town. That's a UCC denomination. And a number of us got together and started a Christian coffee house in town. That was very successful while we were there. But toward the end of my time in college, with the Vietnam War raging, after considerable contemplation, I realized that I would not be willing to kill people in war. I might have been willing to die for my country, but I wasn't willing to kill for it. So I applied for conscientious objector status with my draft board and transferred my membership to the Friends meeting, Quakers, in the college town. When I did that, the minister from my Presbyterian church wrote me a letter saying that some of his best Presbyterians are Friends, with a capital F, because the Quakers are known as the Religious Society of Friends. Then after college, I continued to go to Friends meetings wherever I was. My wife and I married in '72. She was a lifelong Episcopalian and had been in leadership at her church where we were married. And her faith is strong, mine is strong. A little bit of a difference of opinion. She was uncomfortable with the silent meetings of the Quakers, and I was uncomfortable with all of the stand-up, sit-down, kneel liturgy of the Episcopalians. So we either went our separate ways on Sunday morning, or tried to get a copy of the New York Times and read that as our worship on Sunday morning. But when children came along, we really wanted them to have a religious life, and we looked around. We were living in Denver at the time. We looked around at neighborhood churches and found a Presbyterian church that suited us very well, that had an excellent nursery school program and kindergarten, and joined there. And the one thing that struck us about that church was that it was beginning to be a little bit racially integrated because the neighborhood was beginning to integrate. And there was something about that that felt very right, so that when a few years later we moved back to Nashville, we looked for a church that was racially inclusive. And we looked at Presbyterian churches and didn't find anything. Eventually we called the minister who had been my minister at Westminster and asked him about that, and he sent us to Edge Hill United Methodist Church to see Bill Barnes and the inclusive church that really he had founded there. And the first day we were there, as is traditional there, is visitors introduced themselves in the service, and we perhaps foolishly said that we were shopping for a church home. And after the service, Laura McCrae, who was this wonderful African-American woman who had been very active at Tuskegee College and in the Civil Rights Movement, had been at the Highlander Center with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She came up to us and said, "You can stop looking, you found it." And we didn't, we weren't prepared to agree immediately, but it became apparent pretty quickly that she was right. So we've been members at Edge Hill since 1985.
Just like a groomsman?
And career-wise, I was an architect and I did historic preservation work with the National Park Service when we were in Denver. Came back here to do the same sort of thing and did that for a few years, but the life of Edge Hill really made me aware of the great need in the world, and the fact that what I was doing in architecture and preservation was really very esoteric and not making much difference in the lives of the majority of the people. So I knew I wanted to make a career change. I just said, I just got to quit doing this and figure out something else to do. So I quit taking on new projects and wrapped up the ones I had and sort of started my quest for a new career. About that time, my brother died, and I became the executive for his estate and sort of the caretaker for my aging parents. And they, over 3 more years, they both died, and I had begun connecting with Tying Nashville Together, which was a broad-based, faith-based community organization in Nashville, connected with the Industrial Areas Foundation. And that really struck a responsive chord in me, their ability to affect social change from grassroots activism approach, and a really comprehensive understanding of how our democracy works and how the system can be used to leverage change. So that was another important piece, and that was career related, but it was also part of my spiritual journey, and helped me develop an understanding of the difference between charity and justice, and begin to understand that Jesus' ministry was really much more about justice and resisting oppressive systems than it was about charity.
So what's the difference?
Charity actually maintains the status quo. It helps the donor to feel better about what's going on in society, about those injustices. They make a contribution and they feel like they've done something good. but really what it does is to keep the recipient dependent, and it alleviates the worst of the pain of an unjust system, but it doesn't begin to get at the root causes of that injustice. So the justice approach is to accomplish systemic change so that not just one individual but the whole society can benefit from a more just system. So rather than a handout to one individual, or a meal for a day, or whatever, that the whole system is changed in a way that people can do for themselves what they need to do and not be constantly put at a disadvantage and ground down by a system that exploits them.
It makes me think of one of the things that Chris Hedges said when he was talking about his disappointment with the liberal church. He says, the liberal churches will talk glowingly of the poor, but they don't like the smell of the poor.
Yeah. Did you see the Occupy Nashville op-ed in today's Tennessean?
Today's? No.
Yeah.
No.
It's about the foreclosure on Miss Bailey. And there was a news article on the front page of the local section yesterday on the same topic, and there was a good bit of comment about it in various blogs. And Bill Howell's blog was one of those, and his main point was that he was urging that Occupy solve her problems with charity rather than justice. And he's saying, well, why don't you just take up a collection and raise $9,000 and close the gap between the balance on her mortgage and what she could do for a reverse mortgage. But that's exactly the point, that we want to handle this in a just way rather than a charitable way. That if we were to collect $9,000 and pay it to Chase, the bank that's threatening to foreclose on Ms. Bailey, then that would be rewarding them for having cheated Ms. Bailey in the first place.
Yeah.
And let them off the hook so that they can continue to cheat others. If we instead call them to task for what they're doing, and in addition to the greediness of their actions, they have gotten into an arrangement with the Martin Luther King Center in Atlanta to digitize a lot of the documents in the King Center's archives, apparently in exchange for being able to use the King Center in their marketing work and to put on the clothing of Martin Luther King and pretend to share his values, when what they're really doing is just the reverse.